Good afternoon. I know it's late and it's the last day of the conference, so and data is always a snooze for a lot of people, but hopefully we're going to go through some stuff real quick so that we can get to the fun part of this that'll keep you awake. One of the things that, you talk about data, and a lot of small nonprofits don't have the luxury sometimes that municipalities do, and one of the things that we have is a data portal. So a lot of our data, all of our data gets put out to a data portal that people have access to. But besides that, we also do reports. We do, for our animal commission, for the public, we do, monthly reports, quarterly reports, yearly reports that are specific that, we're providing you the data. You don't have to go find it on your own. But one of the things that we look at data is, externally, when you're providing all this data, it shows you're transparent. It's showing people that, here it all is. You can look at it. We're not trying to hide anything from you. Here it is. And here's the reasons why if you have questions. And then internally, we use it to help manage with. One of the things that we have to look for, that we get, is we have key performance indicators that are mandated by our city council that we have to do in our budget. There are key performance that goes about our budget, and that we have things that ordinances that came out recently that we have to do things that are mandated, that we already have the data, but we have to present it in open public. And that's one of the difficult things that we've had to deal with is taking some of this data that we already have and put it forward facing. It's difficult to sometimes program some of this so that the public can see it. And that's one of the challenges that we're solving right now. But one of the things that, normal data that you have to look for, these are our key performance indicators that our budget requires of us. We have how many spays and neuters are we done at the shelter? How many spays and neuters we do in the community? There it is. Our live outcome percentage, percentage returned to owner from the shelter, and shelter intake per 100 residents. And those are 5 key performance issues that our budget requires us to be measured by. Then we look at all the things that our ordinance has to measure by. And there's 16 of these, and I'm not going to go through every one of them, but it's a lot of different data. Then we talk about animal performance. They have their own key performance indicators that they manage by. And they look at the average response time, number of priority 1 and 2 calls completed. So they're using different things that are just division specific for them. But this is what we want to talk about today mainly. This is a new tool that we're going to show you. It's in Microsoft. It's Power BI. And what we're doing is we have wonderful shelter data that is in our software, but this is something that pulls it all together really easy. You can dump all your data into it, and it's very good at showing you very quickly where you're at and what you can do. And I'm going to get Mark to talk about how he uses it and some of the things that he looks at. If we can get this up here. One of the things that it can do is it is set up for intakes and outcomes, and then also you can look at date ranges. So we can say, let's look at everything from 2014 to 2019, and it's immediately going to give us all that data. And then you can narrow it down to just last fiscal year, or we can just say, okay, let's just look at so far this year and what we've done so far, and we can pull it out by month. So if I just wanted to look at what we did in February, and we can go to and we'll go over some of these and what they mean in just a moment.
Just to help as long as he's poking at things, this is live as of yesterday right now. It dumps from Chameleon into this every day. Currently it's manually dumped. Hopefully the guy that left Friday, as of Friday, got it done so it switches. If not, they have to manually update this right now from Chameleon into this Power BI, which is business information. So when you look at this, you saw all our key performance indicators that we have to manage. So right now, I'm going to switch to this mic. In field services, there's some old measures that, when you look at like response to priority 1 and 2 calls, the people that work for me in here can tell you we have no idea how many priority 2 calls we respond to because we don't even use it. Priority 1 calls are going to be emergency calls, backup for law enforcement, injured animals, whatever. But the bigger indicator for us, the bigger thing I need to worry about is we took in 14,000 animals over the counter last year. Our intake went up for the first time last year since we went no-kill. So if we're going to meet those overall performance indicators throughout the shelter, we've got to look at what's causing it. So this tool helps us every day. We can look at this and we can see where we're taking in. These are different jurisdictions that we get animals from. These are zip codes we're getting animals from. And we can look almost live at how many animals came out of that given zip code. If I could scoot it down to where I want it. So right now I'm building a program for a zip code for a neighborhood within a zip code. We'll start April 1st. And I can figure out what kind of resources to put into that neighborhood because I can go into that actual neighborhood. You can drill down in. When we go to this blue spot, the one side is going to be dogs, the other side is going to be cats. So we're coming into kitten season. I don't know how many of you have kitten season, but we can look at this, and I can go to any zip code in here, and I can go into what we call a drill through, and it shows us how many adult cats coming in, how many kittens, and how many neonatals. Now, when you go through and you do it by zip code, you can then look, as of yesterday, what was our highest zip code or highest area for taking in those neonatals, and we can put trapping resources and information resources out there. And what I'm doing with the intake area that we're going to be focusing on is I'm looking at, it has both high intake for dogs and cats, also has a really high intake for puppies, and it also just happens to be our high call volume area. So when you look at this, this is our total number of intakes that we're keeping track of right now. And we can also do this same tool is dumping information from animal services, field services, so I can see activities in a given area. So as I'm looking at this area that we're going to be covering, I know how many calls are running in there on average. I know what time of day we're running them. I know what time of day intake is coming from them. And this is, I have bifocals, and this is really small. So here's 78744. This is where we'll be going, April 1st. Some of my staff don't know what's going on because we're having a big meeting Tuesday. But you can see our intake here is 1,420 animals. And on the side, you see intakes average by day. We got it by month, and we have it how many for the fiscal year. We can narrow this down to just the quarter. And so by looking at the quarter, if we start this in the third quarter of the year, I'll be able to look back historically the third quarter, as we just learned from the other guy. You got to look at your data and your evidence and what was the causation. So if I'm going to throw a bunch of resources into it and I'm going to be spending money there, in 3 months, which is the time I've given, Don and Jason and I will sit down and we'll see, is what we put into this neighborhood really having the effect we want it to, and what works and what doesn't work. But I'm not going to just willy-nilly go into a neighborhood that I feel has a lot of calls and that I feel has a lot of puppies. My staff know how much I love feelings, but we know, because we have the data readily at hand, that this is where it's coming from. So when we then have to set KPIs for next year, if we want to set our new KPI, or city council wants us to have a lower intake, we can look at what it's going to have to take to get there. If I have to put a whole bunch of resources into one little 800 house neighborhood to get a 20% drop in intake in that area, can we then do that throughout a response area? And that's what we need to know. So we'll start with this first 20% in this one area, and we'll see what we can duplicate in that area, because I might not have those resources all year. We have some grant funded resources that could go away. So we need to make sure that what we're doing is working. And with this tool, we can see it every day. We can look every day and see if we're seeing a marked improvement. And not just on today's day, but we can go back immediately last year. I don't have to pull any reports out of Chameleon. I don't have to have somebody write a crystal report. So I can literally go back. I can look at what we did today and what we did last year the same day. What did we do? How many activities did we have? And so if you don't have Windows Business, I would highly recommend it. Even if you can update spreadsheets to this, you can share things. But this is an incredible tool. Again, we liked it so much for our intakes and outcomes that now we use it we're getting into it with activities that doesn't quite have the information depth that I want yet. But we can also possibly use it for adoptions, so we can look in an office and we can see how many adoptions did we do this weekend. Should we have stayed open on a holiday and spend all that overtime? That's something we have to look at. So this is a simple tool, and it doesn't matter if you're a huge facility like we are that's taking in 17,000 animals, or if you're taking in 1,000 animals. If you know where they're coming from and when they're coming, you can then adjust your staffing. I run the Pet Resource Center, and so when you look at this, our time of day for intakes, guess what time we open? Our highest time of intake. It's because we're open. That people are sometimes stacked up outside the door. They're waiting to drop off animals, so that it makes sense for that. But when trying to figure out staffing, if I need to close for an hour for lunch, I don't want to close at 1 o'clock because we still have a high intake, but maybe 3 o'clock would be okay to shut the doors and go to lunch. Just an option. Not saying I'm going to close. But anyway, for this zip code, so when here I'm going to show you the dogs and cat issue. Super sensitive mouth. Out of all these animals, we've got 268 puppies. Think we need some spay-neuter outreach there? This is an area, so just for context, for you that don't live in Austin, there's 71,000 homes in this zip code, and it's just one of our zip codes. So there's a whole bunch of, I look at data also from Postal Service, so I know the average income, I know the ethnicity of the group. So we're going to focus on one part of this zip code that's only got 8,000 homes in it. So I know on average it takes about 9 minutes to do knock and talks at doors. There's a ton of research out there talking about research papers. You can look and see how long it takes to canvass. And so I kind of know how much I have to put in there. But we should see an appreciable drop in some of this stuff. If we go back to cats, I'm going to redo the whole thing.
One of the things that we did recently is we needed to have clothes for a training all day long. And so we pulled this up, we looked at it, we said, when are our lowest adoptions and lowest intake days? And that would be the day that we closed. So we closed on a Wednesday because historically, what the data we looked at, that was when we got the least amount of traffic. And that worked out well. And all of this, even though there's canned things up there, there's drop-down boxes that you can still drill down further and further and further to get more information. And you see at the bottom there, it's even by animal, it goes across the data. So it's very powerful.
This is our kittens. You can see just in this zip code, we're actually higher on neonatals than we are on adult cats, which is common because we don't pick up stray cats in our city. We're not required to pick up at-large cats. So in most places that you don't have to pick up cats, your kittens are going to be high. But our neonatal, that's way too high. As somebody sitting that works the kitten nursery here once in a while would attest. We want to keep this number out. So if we can see this number go down right away, that would be very good for our operation and for the cats, because we know when neonatals come in, they have a high probability of dying. So this is an area where I'm not just going to be out there trying to stop intake of dogs or cats, but we also want to get information out there to people about why we need to spay neuter at large cats, or if they're feeders, if they're community cats, and we can talk to them about our S&R program, our TNR programs, and our general spay and neuter overall. So as we look at this, each person that's assigned to this task will then have measurables under them that I will be keeping track of, so we know if they're having an effect. So if I have somebody out there and I expect them to knock on 60 doors a day and have a 9-minute conversation, that's a little high. So I have to be realistic on what my expectation is. But I know in 3 months we should be able to touch every house there. And then I also will have backup. Say we do a spay-neuter referral, the guy that's in charge of that spay-neuter referral will have measurables on him. So all this data doesn't do you any good if A, you don't know what you're collecting it for, and B, if you don't know how to use it. So, and in that light, this stuff over here is our spay-neutered, not spayed or neutered. Unfortunately, that's a result of outtake. The way it dumps from chameleon, we can't measure it coming in. I would love to know how many unneutered and unspayed animals are coming in, but that's not a true reflection. So that's something we're trying to figure out from our tech guy, how we can get that to report on intake. But if you use chameleon, this is super easy to use, and it works really well to look at different areas.
And it's something that you can make available to your staff that might not have those chameleon skills. But this is very easy, very user-friendly, so they can pick up on, how are we doing in a department.
Here's the zip code right next to it. It's our second highest intake area. I was just going to drill into the cats real quick to show you how similar they are. This one's higher on neonatals, lower on kittens, but it's literally the next zip code over. It's the same area. All of my staff would feel that this was the bigger zip code, but they're right next to each other. Does anybody have any questions about how we're going to use this or how we're using it?
I was wondering if it breaks down with the intake, like the intake type, whether it's like...
It does. So she asked if it breaks down intake type. So here's the number that matters to me. She asked if it breaks down intake types. For my intake person or PRC supervisor, this was like angels were singing when she saw this, because there were some things we thought we knew, we weren't sure. So this is intakes to Austin Animal Center just over the counter. This is not any field intakes. What this does or may include is some injured animals. They might be coming in for quarantine, but they came in over the counter. So as you look at this, my intake department is not very big. It's not very many people. So they intake a lot of animals. The more important thing with this is she started combing through this information, and if you see right here, this is jurisdictions. Not all of these are ours, and some of them are within Travis County, but they don't pay part of our bills. So they don't have a piece of the pie, but yet they want to bring animals to us. So what she did is she went through every one of these that showed animals coming in for the last fiscal year that came from out of our jurisdiction that should have never come here. So one department alone, one city alone was responsible for 80 animals. So she emailed them and said, hey, just a heads up, we're not going to take your animals anymore, be prepared. Because if that's even 40 big dogs, especially if they're blocky-headed, short-haired things, that's hugely impactful for us. So they have their own animal protection or animal control in that city, and there's no reason for us to be taking those animals, but for somehow they were slipping by us. Where we run into problems is you might live in a city, but you get your mail from somewhere else, but you're technically in our jurisdiction or not in our jurisdiction based solely on your address, but your mailing address can be a bit deceptive. So even these cities that are in our jurisdictions that don't pay any of our bills, I just went past one. That's not a real one. Here's Cedar Park. Cedar Park, Texas has their own animal control. Why should we take any of their animals? Now, it could be it was a return from an adoption of ours, but that's what she can then go through and look. That's only 40 animals. So she might find out that 8 of those came from us, and it was just people that lived there that were bringing them back to us because the adoption didn't work out. We're okay with that. But we certainly aren't okay with taking other jurisdictions' dogs when we have such an overwhelming amount of dogs or cats, either one.
So when you see that, you contact them and just give them back?
So what she asked is if we see that, do we contact them and get them back? If we can. We have recently had a dog, it was a pretty bad bite dog, and I was more than happy to run it down to the jurisdiction where it lived because we didn't want it. And they were okay with taking it. I mean, the bite happened in the area. It should have never come to us.
And when they don't refuse to take the dog back?
If they refuse to take it back, we deal with it. But I have a long memory. I mean, because we do the same thing. If somebody has a dog, if Waco had a dog that was ours and it was at risk, we would certainly see if there was something we could do for it. The bigger thing is, because we're a municipal shelter, we have to constantly be aware of how we're spending our money. I am a huge fan of not paying a lot of taxes. So if I'm going to spend people's tax dollars, I want to spend them wisely, and I want them to get as much as they can for what they're doing. Money doesn't grow on a tree for us. So we have to make sure that we're using our money and our time judiciously and to the best effect. So having the right resources and the right tools to use, and making sure that if you're setting key performance indicators, do they really matter? Like I said, some of them that we report on really don't matter to us, but they matter to somebody, 8 years ago when they signed a contract. So we continue to report them. But to me, they don't necessarily matter. The daily stuff every day, getting dogs home in the field, that really matters. Performance indicators, when you break it down further, we have them incorporated into our animal protection team's performance reviews. So they're not judged on how many animals they catch. They're actually, it's a performance indicators on how many they return in the field, how many referrals they do for spay neuter, how many referrals they do for fencing, because that's keeping animals out. That's what we want to measure our staff on. That's success to us. An animal control officer comes in and says, man, I wasn't at the shelter all week because I didn't have any dogs to pick up. They got a computer in their truck. Happy for them. That makes me happy. They didn't have to come in, so they didn't have to bring anything in. As much as we try every day to do it, and we're always looking for new ways to do things, having this right data, eventually what I'm hoping is with the animal control side, we can actually pull up officers and see what they're doing, and see how many of those, that I'll be able to see that live on the computer. We're not to that yet, but hopefully it will be. So that way I can see what officers are really, doing stellar things out there, putting microchips in the field. That's one of the things we do. So we want that in their SSPR, that they're doing microchips, that they're doing outreach type stuff.
One of the things that, data, if you use it, can help you. And, one of the things that, you always hear in animal sheltering is you have to stay open 24/7 to help your community when they're there. They're there, when they're not at work, they need to be where you're at. And I was with a community that had that philosophy, and we started looking at data. And the data proved that, nobody's coming on Sunday when you're paying all these people and you get 2 adoptions, and so they closed on Sundays prior to me getting there. Then we started looking at data again and found that we were opening early, staying late, and we looked at the time frames when the adoptions were happening and adjusted our hours, closing a little early, opening a little later, and there was no change. And then we partnered with the city, and we started taking city holidays because the city staff was not going to be there. And, you can't do that because it's going to, people are off, they're going to be there. We took every city holiday, and we actually expanded our adoptions. And so the data was there to prove that in our community that didn't work. Now, in your community that might be totally different, but data can be something that you can utilize to prove your point if you're collecting the data. So with all these tools, there's tools out there that I know a lot of small nonprofits, you can't afford the high dollar software and stuff, but there's all kinds of tools out there that you can get like this that will allow you to measure those outcomes and get the results that you're looking for. And it could be, hey, you know what, we're wrong. We need to do this differently. But this data is something. This was just some of our data from last year. We had a 97.5% live exit rate. I don't know how much you can see that. 61,000 hours donated by volunteers. So with the data, you can track things like this, and it really shows that you're making a difference. There's our contact information on the screen. And if you have any questions for Mark or myself, we'll stick around and ask any of them. I know we're letting you out early, but it's for Sunday afternoon. Thank you.